Hello, everybody, and welcome to my presentation. Today, the title, as you can see on your screen here, is going to be Integrated Pest Management Strategies to Approach Pests and Customers as a Whole. My name is Ellie Sanders, and I am with the National Pest Management Association. So just a little bit of a introduction for everyone here today. I am the Technical Services Manager. That's my official title. But just to give you an idea of what I do with NPMA, I have a whole bunch of different things, but they include giving presentations like this, producing technical and other resources for the pest control industry and NPMA members, running online courses, NPMA wood destroying insect forms, whole bunch of other stuff. My background, I have a degree in biology and then a master's in entomology from Virginia Tech. In my master's, I was focused more on lawn and ornamental side of the world. So that is kind of my crossover into the ornamental space. And then when I came to NPMA about 2.5, 3 years ago or so, I switched over to more urban and structural pests. So I have a little bit of a toe in both worlds, and I hope that that will be helpful in my explaining today's topic to all of you. But NPMA in general, for those of you who are not familiar, the National Pest Management Association, we are a trade association who serves the structural pest control industry. Our members are our pest management professionals, our vendors, suppliers, folks just related to the industry. We don't do pest management work ourselves, rather that is our members who do. We work to benefit our members through our efforts to protect public health through all of pest management. So happy to answer anyone's questions about NPMA stuff specifically later on if you want. But that's who I am and that's what we are. So in we go. Generally, overview of what we're going to be talking about today. IPM, that is the big thing. So we have a couple different sides of the IPM world. So our cultural, chemical, biological, and mechanical control, those are terms you are probably at least relatively familiar with. We're going to talk about some of the general IPM, some specifics as well. I know we do have some other talks in our program that will get into more of those pest specifics, but I am going to do some broad categories to kind of bring perspective to these pest specifics and IPM and kind of well as we go from our general to our specific to give you those examples. So we're going to apply the pest biology and habits to inspections and all that good stuff. So that's kind of our broad overview. But to get into, I think the first thing that is important is a definition. Now, this is a giant screen of text, and I actually don't expect you to read all of this right now. We're going to break it down. We're going to go bit by bit, but this is to show you that IPM is a hard definition to be really specific on. There are a million different definitions you will find from different sources, and so we kind of just I found one that I enjoyed a lot, and this is from it's from the EPA. It's government agency, so it's a pretty broad-reaching definition that covers all sorts of areas of IPM, not just the structural pest control industry, but we're going to kind of go through the bits of this. So again, sorry for the huge block of text, but there is a little bit of a reason for that. So the first section of it, this first sentence is that integrated pest management is an effective and environmentally sensitive approach to pest management that relies on a combination of common sense practices. So, couple things to point out here. First of all, common sense practices. Well, that's not very specific, is it? Common sense back in the day could have just been absolutely scorched earth, kill everything in sight. Forever chemicals that we knew little about, but hey, it worked to kill the bugs. That seemed like common sense at the time. But over time, that evolves with more of our understanding of the world around us. So, common sense it works for the definition because we want to include as much as possible, but we recognize that this changes over time. And this effective and environmentally sensitive is super important because not everything can possibly be 100% bulletproof, environmentally perfectly safe. It's just not possible. The fact is that we are killing organisms. Organisms are part of the environment, and therefore it is impossible to be perfectly safe. So we approach it in the environmentally sensitive way. We try to be amenable to as much as we can to help the environment in the ways that we understand it. So it's not without risk. Nothing in life is without risk. So I think that that's important. And then effective. Of course, we want things to be effective. And the idea here is that IPM is the most effective approach because it's going to take a look at everything as a whole. Now, the second part of this definition here um, is going to be IPM programs use current comprehensive information on the life cycles of pests and their interaction with the environment. So this is why we study each of our pests so in so much detail. That's why people like me can get a whole degree in one particular pest. I particularly studied the red-headed flea beetle. It was a pest of ornamentals in commercial nurseries. I know just about everything about this one bug really well, and I could spend 2 years doing that because there's a whole lot to know about these bugs. So there are dozens and hundreds of people who learn so much about any particular bug, and working together is how we can use that knowledge and how we can all take little bits of that knowledge to apply to our day-to-day basis. So, biology in general is studying interactions in the environment and how everything works together. So, the life cycles of pests are important because that tells us how these creatures interact with their environment. And without understanding that, then we can't fully manage and control it. So, one thing that I've heard, I don't remember who said it, but I really liked it, was that pests are a symptom of their environment. They highlight the flaws in our building designs and our habits. So we use the information we know about them and their life cycles, and then we tie that in with the flaws that they present to us about what we have in our buildings and our environments. And that's how we attack this management approach. So again, that's using our knowledge about them and interactions with the environment. Again, remembering we're being sensitive to that environment. And then the next part of this definition, this information in combination with available pest control methods is used to manage pest damage by the most economical means and with the least possible hazard to people, property, and the environment. Well, we can't control nature completely, and that's why management is such a critical term here. That's why it's IPM, not IPC. It's not integrated pest control, it's integrated pest management because we can't pretend that we can control nature, other creatures, but we can do our darn best to manage them. And it does seem semantic sometimes to pick out that part about management and control, and there are people who will argue with you for hours on why one versus another is important, and they'll argue on these definitions. There's someone out there, I guarantee you, that hates this definition that we're using today. But anyways, we got to go with something, right? Got to go with some way to explain this to you all. But harkening back to the environment too, the least possible hazard to people, property, and environment, not just the nature around us, but to the people who are living in it, to the property that is present in it. We want to harm everything we can, the least, while harming the pests the most. So that's why it's this difficult balance, this sort of least possible hazard, most possible pest management approach to things. But why is IPM important? Well, I just mentioned a whole bunch of things. Our mission of pests that they cause harm to public health, food, and property. So our mission is to protect public health, food, and property. Public health, we're going to go into the next couple slides specifically. Food, pests can be damaging to food, property pests can be damaging to property. We'll go through this all specifically, but this is kind of, I have it in such big font here because this is really the epitome of what pest management is that pests cause damage in these ways, so we want to protect everything that we can against them. So, one of the reasons that pests are a harm to public health, allergens and diseases. So, there's a whole bunch of different pests out there. They all can be specifically harmful to public health in their own ways. But generally, some of these things that are worth mentioning that are very common, pests can exacerbate allergies and asthma. Asthma has been on the rise in the past couple decades, especially in vulnerable populations, children, the elderly, the immunocompromised in other ways. And then the allergens that bugs can shed by their cast skins, by their molts, they can aggravate these in people. There's chemicals called histamines that you may have heard of. You know, you think of taking antihistamine. A histamine is an allergen, and a lot of bugs can have histamines that can be shed into their environment, and that can be a problem for folks with a mild allergy. It can make it even worse. But the point too is that with or without bites, disease can be transmitted. So we have all sorts of icky bugs that crawl over icky things and can track that bacteria over to the surfaces that people are coming in contact with. We have all sorts of foodborne diseases that you say you got a cockroach running around on some grimy corner of the floor, and then that cockroach runs over your food, and voila, E. coli. There's quite a connection between pests mechanically vectoring disease that's just tracking it over onto things from their bodies instead of necessarily just biting you. But also biting you. That is another thing too. We've probably all heard before the whole bit about how mosquitoes are the deadliest animal on earth because of the diseases that they transmit that kills more people than any other animal, any other pest that transmits diseases. So it's not just mosquitoes. There's other biting pests that can cause disease. There's other types of flies. We even have just physical stings and bites from pests can be harmful even without transmitting diseases. But that's a whole host of reasons why they're bad for your health. But another thing beyond the physical is you have the psychological effects. Fear of pests. How often do you have someone who calls terrified because they've just seen a bug? You don't even know what it is yet, and they're out of their minds. Oh my God, this bug is in my house because they have that fear. It's may seem irrational, but to them it's very, very real. It's very important. And then after you have a pest infestation or independently of that, based off of other stressors in a person's life, you can wind up with delusory parasitosis, where people think that there are bugs when there actually aren't. And then they can end up, with this psychological horror going on in their lives. They have these imagined bites that they scratch themselves red, thinking that there's imaginary they think that there's bugs there and there's not, and they hand you empty Tupperwares where, oh, the bugs are in here. This is what was on me. It's a scary thing. And so psychologically, whether it's the effects of actually having pests after the pests are gone, or whether the pests weren't there in the first place, the fear of them can be very detrimental to somebody's mental health, and that can cascade into their physical health and well-being. And then turf and ornamental importance, something that I feel like I often have to explain to some folks who may only be in the structural and urban pest world is why it's important to control some of these pests in turf and ornamental because, well, they're outside, they're not transmitting diseases to people. So, like, what's the big deal? But the thing is, too, is aesthetic importance does matter. It's not just this silly thing to control pests and prevent damage to the leaves. This is damage from the red-headed flea beetle, the pest I studied in my master's. This is what would happen when these beetles would eat these hydrangea leaves. It's unsightly, it's ugly, and it hurts the plant. And once you have a plant that is just eaten alive by whatever bug it is, whether you have a lawn that's been turning brown because of bluegrass weevils or what have you. It's important to the people and to the companies that their aesthetics match the company. They match their people. You want things to look nice because when things look nice, then people are happier. And as simply put, is when people are happy, they're less stressed and they're healthier. So it does cascade. It may not be quite as direct as a mosquito giving someone dengue or giving them West Nile virus, but it still does cascade and still is important. And people care about presenting the property as well cared for. It's important to an image to present something as well done. So there is really importance in turf and ornamental damages being reduced as well. So I put that in there. I throw a bone for all of you who may be tired of hearing the griping from anyone who thinks that it's not as important. But again, back into urban and structural damage. It is a huge problem. Pests can cause billions with a B in damage every year from big to small problems, from just messing up some little piece of wood that maybe wasn't structurally important to absolutely devastating the pieces of wood that are holding up a house. One time I heard someone was explaining in a wood destroying presentation that is something like such a small percentage, like 5% less volume of wood can lead to like 30 or 40% less structural integrity of wood, which is crazy to me. So it's huge the impact that even a little bit of pest damage can cause. So that's why it's so expensive to fix. And then, outdoor management can directly prevent these indoor pest issues. It doesn't always start from inside the house. A lot of times it's starting from outside of the house, right around it. What are we doing to prevent pests from getting in and therefore preventing stuff like we see here, these wood destroying insect damage, clearly riddling this structure here, this wood that is absolutely compromised. So money, safety, these are all at stake when pests damage property. No one needs convincing that pests are bad, but we're painting this picture of why it's important in the first place. So we've now kind of established a few of the reasons that pest control is important. So going to kind of shift a little bit here into explaining some of the processes of IPM and how we use it. Now, the IPM loop. This is not an official term. This is a little bit more of what I like to call it in explaining it. But we have kind of this flow between monitoring, prevention, treatment, more monitoring, all of these. It's kind of a cycle. IPM is really looking at the pest issues as a whole. Prevention, you want to prevent the pest issues, and so you're beginning inspection at the starting point. Monitoring is this continued state of things. It's treatment is supposed to be just a tiny portion of IPM, and that's what you guys are doing for the most part. So it feels like treatment is more of a portion of it, but really it is this whole cycle, all that the monitoring, the treatment, the prevention, everything going together, because the idea is, and we want folks to always hire a professional for pest control because they can help tell folks how to prevent pests in the first place, how to monitor things and catch them early before they have to call in pest control. They have to call you folks in because things got so bad, and now the treatment is that much more expensive, extensive, and can be very difficult to manage a pest problem. Whereas if you had been monitoring things in the first place and been taking those preventative measures, it would have been much less of a problem. And another term that we often, let me get to the next one, that we often see in IPM discussions is this thing called an action threshold. This is a very plant-focused term, much more common in the agricultural and L&O spaces than it is in structural. And I like to ask this question when I'm in person with a large group of people. I always ask, how many cockroaches are acceptable in a kitchen? And then everybody shouts back zero. Because that's the thing is there's your action threshold for pretty much any pest inside is one. You see one bug and customers are calling you. They want to take action because that thing isn't supposed to be there in the first place. It's not okay for someone to have one cockroach in their kitchen. That sets off the alarm bells, versus you get a field of a crop. You can't possibly eliminate every pest, and you won't even really notice one individual bug. But it's things like, oh, well, we've hit X number of bugs per plot of land, and we think this is where we're going to get economic injury to our crops. And that's where those action thresholds are, is how many bugs until we have to do something, how many bugs until we're losing money. But in indoors, it's often next to nothing, and with the high standards folks hold for their turf and ornamentals, thresholds for pests are also often quite low. So with a PGA golf course, how many brown spots are acceptable at the final hole? None. That's not acceptable at all. Your action thresholds are very, very low. But we understand too is that in that definition at the beginning that we said, it is management, it is not complete control. It's not possible to get complete control. So what are we going to do to get our best possible management? It's not going to be perfect, but how can we make it the best we can? So then I have this needs pyramid. You've probably seen it in various graphics of the things that pests need to survive, that they need to thrive. So food, water, shelter, whatever form it is, whatever pest it is, it needs these in varying amounts. Some pests need very, very little water or very, very little food, and then maybe more of the other sides of our little triangle here. But the IPM approach looks at stopping pests by getting, one or more of these things that they need to survive, and that's how we're going to get the upper hand on them. So earlier, I said too, pests are a symptom of our environment. They show us our weak spots. They show us how have we let these pests get access to our food? How have we let them get access to our water? How have we let them get access to our shelter? And how can we stop them getting access to those things? So, how do we stop them? Well, glad you asked. So these were some of the IPM toolbox, they like to call it. So we have a lot of different methods that we can employ, and we're going to do a little highlight on each of these methods. This habitat modification, cultural control, mechanical control, chemical control. Biological control is also part of things too, but that typically is more prevalent in agricultural or in forest pest control. It is a little bit less relevant in urban structural and even sometimes in herf and ornamental. So we're going to focus on some of these things here that we have in our toolbox. The first of which, habitat modification. This is our outdoor stuff. Okay? So here you are. This is a structure. This is a whole lot of plant material that is all sorts of overgrown right next to it. So how can we change the situation, and how can we change the pest's ability to get into the structure? Right now, they have what I like to call our pest highways. We have all sorts of plants crawling up the side of that house. That is just a highway for pests to get in. So what are we going to do? Ideally, we want it to look more like this. This is the same place that's got a whole bunch less vegetation. Vegetation control is huge. Having your perimeter around a structure gives you your moat around your castle. It prevents a lot of pests from very easily getting in. It's difficult, that's for sure. It requires a lot of cooperation with the customers um, to really get into fixing things. But this is a great example of how habitat modification may be preventing pests. Now, cultural control. This is what habits we have and how we've designed, our culture of just existing our daily everything to either allow or to prevent pests. Things like the culture of, say, a house that just doesn't empty their trash that often. This garbage can that is clearly overflowing is a haven for pests. So, you have a kitchen that has a lot of clutter, a lot of garbage, a lot of food that might be laying out, space for pests. We want to design areas where we have things like lids on our trash cans, practices like taking out that trash more often, keeping things clean. These are sort of the cultural control practices that we can put in place to kind of get to the root of why these pest havens were there in the first place. The next thing we have mechanical control. Mechanical control can be a lot of different things, but typically one of the biggest, it's physically removing a pest. It is mechanically taking that pest out. And so that can be done in a couple different ways. First here, this is a vacuum that the vacuum bag and the vacuum had been used to get up a bunch of pests. I believe in this case, this was bed bugs. If you have a huge level of pests that you just need to knock down really fast, vacuuming them up can be significantly helpful to alleviating the initial perception of pest pressures before you can get to the everything else. So, vacuuming them, sticky traps, light traps, even some exclusion measures can be counted as mechanical control, the things that are just physically getting rid of the bugs and physically preventing them from getting in. This is a great picture here of putting in a doorstop, a door sweep, that is, and closing off a huge gap that was probably letting a lot of pests just walk right in. And now that gap is much, much smaller. It's gonna help prevent a lot of those creatures from crawling in. And then chemical control. This is it's I think a little bit of a skewed perspective we have in the role that chemical control plays because it is something that folks in our industry, we're licensed to apply certain products, and the chemical control aspect is something that the homeowners or the companies that are our customers may not be able to do themselves. But IPM, as we said before, is a lot of an ounce of prevention worth a pound of cure, right? There's a lot that they need to be doing. And so we see more chemical control in the IPM approach. And on the other side of things, too, is there are some folks who believe that IPM means no chemicals, and that's not true at all. Chemicals are extremely important in a integrated pest management program. It is just making sure that they are used properly, that we're using the right ones, we are doing it in the best possible, most effective, most environmentally sensitive way that we can. So we have all kinds of formulations, manufacturers, modes of action. We have a lot of chemistry and a lot of science at our disposal that we can use to get underneath these pests and to manage them. And so I would be remiss not to mention under chemical control, rotating modes of action. This is something that is very important. I have a lot of these pictures on the screen I mean, this is all the super complicated chemistry stuff that you certainly don't need to fully understand. I barely understand some of the complexities of the chemistry, but the good news is that the folks who create them understand them much better, and they're the ones who help create the labels that tell us what to do and how to use them safely. But rotating modes of action Mode of action, MOA, that is how the insecticide works. That is how it kills the insect. And there are different numbered groups for different modes of action. So the different chemicals, we have, numbered groups. So you could have a chemical in group 4 that has a different mode of action than something in group 28. And when we say rotating modes of action, we are rotating those numbers. So if it has a different number, and some people, these are called the IRAC numbers because the Insecticide Resistance Action Committee, IRAC, is the one who came up with these numbered classifications. And so every pesticide will have its IRAC number, and that number tells us its mode of action. And when we want to rotate our mode of action, we look at that number, we pick a different one, as long as it, is still labeled for the pest and everything like that. And that's how we know we are getting something different. And IRAC, the Insecticide Resistance Action Committee, their whole purpose is to prevent pesticide resistance in insects by this rotation. Because if you are throwing the same weapon against your enemy a million times, they start to learn how to defend themselves. Insects have a short lifespan. They can come up with resistance to a product in far less time than it would take for maybe other organisms that live longer. You get a fruit fly that lives a few days, that thing can go through generations after generations in not that long of a time, and it can come up with resistance pretty quickly. So that's why we change it, is we switch up the weapons that we're using against them so that they can't quite fully learn how to defend themselves against it. They don't they don't come up with new enzymes to metabolize these insecticides, because all of a sudden now they're facing something else that's doing it in a completely different way. So that's how we prevent it. And again, you don't need to fully understand every aspect of the complex chemistry to use it responsibly, but we want to always make sure that we are understanding which chemicals we are using, at least by reading the label and making sure that we understand that the label is the law and it is most critical that we are following that. So that's my soapbox about modes of action and how critical that is. But that's part of a responsible chemical control approach to IPM. So those, we all just went through a whole bunch of them. They're all behavior based ultimately. We talked in our original definition that we understand the biology and the habits of pests so that we can control them most efficiently. And all of these management strategies, these control practices, these are specific to the behaviors of the pests we are facing. And we use them specifically against what pest we have that we are looking to manage. And so we look at them and the life cycle of that pest and work with it to get to what we have. So we'll get to a couple pest specifics in a bit that I'll kind of fly through relatively quickly to give you some examples. Then another important thing too is seasonal behavior. So pest strategies and understanding pest biology, a lot of it can be very seasonal. Times of year can make a big difference. Temperatures outside and inside, one being warmer or colder than the other, can make a difference in pest behaviors. As these pests go through the different cycles of whether they are focusing on just feeding themselves, finding shelter, or reproducing and creating more pests. We have to understand what times of year or times of day, even just what, seasonally and temporally, when these things are going to change, and that informs our IPM practices. I have a picture of an ant here because if you have an area that you do have seasons, you can certainly know then that there are times of year where we get ants and where we don't. After it rains, we get ants. That's a weather change that can be affecting things as well. So there's a lot that goes into it. And it would be impossible to explain every pest relation to the seasons in one presentation. So we'll do what we can. But basically, you have to know your enemy, right? you know who they are, what they do, why they do it, and then you get better control. Then you can manage the pests better. So, with that being said, we'll go through some of our pest groups here. And so while of course we do manage most of the pests we do are insect pests, the other category of life that we have pests under are rodents. So I'll touch a little bit about rodents to start off with. Um, we got three main types of rodents that are urban and structural pests are Norway rats or roof rats or house mouse. And the reason that these rodents are pests are because they are what we call synanthropic. That means they require or greatly benefit from man's presence. So these particular rodents are pests because they love being near people. They have evolved over all of human history to enjoy being nearby humans. And while it's possible that they can live in the wild, they're really going to be around people. And so at this point in humanity's history, these rodents are almost always around structures. Our first rat here, Norway rat. This is, you know, your classic New York City rat, your classic city rat. They tunnel towards the ground. They have this complex tunnel system. Identification wise, you know, you can look at a thing and just know it's a rat because we all have some basic level of understanding of animals around us. But specifically, if you want to know that it's a Norway rat and not the other kind of rat, the roof rat is the other kind. The tail of a Norway rat is shorter than the length of the head and the body, versus the roof rats have a longer tail. So that's your little ID thing. But these are the rats that you can see. You can see huge ones. They're social. They That's one of the things too about a lot of pests is when they're social, they're a lot more difficult to control. Rodents they're decently smart too. They've got little systems and hierarchies and all that. They're, you know, all their burrows and everything that they have complicated systems to try to protect themselves against predators, against being discovered by people. Um, and one little fun fact that I like to let people know about too with rats is that the even the biggest rats that you see, they're all less than 2 pounds. You're almost never gonna see a rat that's over 2 pounds because they can just fluff themselves up like a scared cat to make themselves look bigger. So that's sometimes why people say, "Oh, that rat was the size of a cat." Well, no. It wanted you to think that, and I guess it did a good job. But it's my fun little rat fact to go along with this. Um, another rodent that we have are our house mouse. You see him, this guy tucked away next to these hamburger buns, little thing with those beady little eyes. They're highly successful synanthropic animals. They can fit through tiny, tiny holes the size of a dime. If that mice if those mice can get their skull through a space, they can get the rest of their body to follow. So making sure that you exclude or you've prevented places where they can come in, those holes can actually be pretty small and still be big enough for these rodents to get in. And they can have a whole bunch of offspring really quickly, and you can get a big mouse problem really fast. We know insects reproduce quickly, and so these guys are, you know, in some ways they're a little bit slower than most insects. However, you can get a whole bunch of mice real fast, and even one mouse inside a house is an unacceptable threshold of mice. No one wants any mice in their house, and so that's uh, that's a little bit about that. Public health risks specific to rodents. We got diseases just from touching their droppings, from bites from them. You know, someone runs into a mouse, startles it, or even tries to grab the thing to shoo it out, or something like that, that you can get bitten, and then there's diseases from that. Bacteria, viruses all over these things, paws in the waste that they're rummaging through that can, you know, they run their little paws through something gross and then they run over your counter. And well, now you got gross things on your counter too. Allergens as well. we talked about that with insects at the very beginning, the cast skins and everything, but rodent droppings can upset folks' allergies as well. And then active rodent signs when you have a rodent infestation, when you're in your inspection stage of your IPM program, you're monitoring, you're looking for these ARS, these active rodent signs entrances. We just mentioned, a mouse with the size of a dime size hole. This gap here shown at the bottom of a doorway is certainly larger than that. Oh, that's just a small little corner, nothing big's gonna get in. Well, something big could get in. It just needs to fit its head through. Um, Another active rodent sign are the droppings. They use their droppings, their feces and urine as methods of communication to other rodents, and that's why those droppings and the micro droplets of urine seemingly are everywhere because they're telling other rodents what's up. They're telling them where they've been and where might be safe to go. So that's why there are so many and they're so spread out. They're not like some other animals that keep everything in a nice, neat little pile. Nah, it's everywhere. So droppings are a major active rodent sign to look out for. But yeah, holes with sebum, those are the oils from their paws around the entrance that tells you that a hole that is present is being actively used by rodents. You get burrows in the ground outside, droppings, rodent droppings always going to have fur in them, so you know it's a rodent dropping. You could have gnaw marks on floor, wall, siding, packaging. The rodents are gnawing on stuff, and those are all things to look for to tell you that rodents are there. So now that we've seen that the rodents are there in our IPM program and our monitoring that we've been up to, okay, well, what else? What else do we need to do to tackle this approach? Well, we need cooperation from our customers. We need things like removing food sources and exclusion. Those are the preventative measures, the things that the customers can do to help make our job easier in getting those rodents out. We have our tamper-resistant bait stations, we have glue boards, we have snap traps, we have lots of tools at our disposal for rodents. But ultimately, they're not going to be super effective if we don't have that cooperation. If you have a pile of garbage left outside that's easily accessible and it's full of a piece of cake, you think the rat wants your rodent bait station? They want a piece of cake. So you got to eliminate the things that are more appealing so that you can actually get these bait stations to kill the rats and the mice. The glue boards and the snap traps, a lot of rodents can be scared of new things, and so you want to make sure that you're putting out enough of these and having them safely tucked away so no people or pets get hurt, but you want to make sure those are widely available for the rodents to come across in their tracks. So that's kind of our moral of the story, IPM wise, for rodents is that we learned a lot about their monitoring and my rapid fire description of their active rodent signs, but working with our customers and understanding why the rodents are there in the first place, and then what we can do to keep them under control, to get them under control as the first place, to start that management, and then to continue that management process. That is the IPM approach, is not just coming in and chucking out some snap traps and saying, see ya. No one's doing that. We have to look at the problem as a whole. They're a symptom of environment. How did they get there in the first place? So that's my rodent spiel. And again, I'm going to kind of rapid fire through a couple other types of pests. But now that we've done rodents, we're shifting over to our insect side of the world. So very, very briefly, we're gonna run through what is an insect. Well, first of all, rodents are not insects. We all probably knew that, but specifically, we know that um, arthropods, that's our much wider category of creature, everything with an exoskeleton, bilateral symmetry and segmentation. A lobster is an arthropod, a crab is an arthropod, bugs are arthropods. And then an insect specifically, we know they have 6 legs, they have 3 body segments, 1 pair of antennae, and an exoskeleton made of chitin. So something like a fly. We know that's an insect because it checks off not only does it check off all our arthropod boxes, and we take it further and we see that it checks off all our insect boxes. Okay, cool. So we also then know from this, and as you all should know too, spiders are not insects, ticks are not insects. Those are some pests that we do encounter, but the vast majority of the organisms that our pest control folks are doing are insects. So we're going to go through some types of insect pests. Again, I understand that we're going to have some other presentations that may talk about some other specifics and other pests, but we're just looking at examples of how IPM can be used. Cockroaches. Everyone loves our cockroaches. These guys, the thing about insects too is that since there are so many types, it is important to make sure you are identifying the pest properly because that's how you know what to treat. So somebody says, well, I have a water bug. Okay, well, depending on the area of the country you're in, that can mean a lot of different things. Um, but a water bug typically is an American cockroach. That's what yeah, cockroach, water bug, usually that's the same thing depending on where you are. And so we want to make sure that we're certain that just because a customer used a certain common name, that we are confirming that it actually is what we think, because you never know, they could be from some other state where they call whatever pest some different regional term that you may not be familiar with. So you got to make sure you get eyes on the thing or a picture of it and see to know what it is. Um, this guy, cockroaches, well, okay, I can tell it's a cockroach, but specifically, what are those things that tell us that? We have they're flattened dorsoventrally. That just means they're flattened like a pancake, not a taco. They've got these long legs with the spines on them. They have their head is tucked down underneath their body, and they've got those long antennae. They have those membranous wings. Some of them can fly, some of them can't. They're not spectacular flyers, but it's possible. Those long antennae and those legs, they give them advantages in sensing the world around them, knowing what's nearby, and um, avoiding detection. And they like getting in tight little spaces that they can crawl into, and they know exactly their margins because of those antennae and those spiny legs too. And why are cockroaches specifically a public health threat? Well, allergen concerns, mechanical vectors of bacteria and viruses, and fear. People don't like unwanted guests. I don't like an unwanted guest, regardless of the ickiness factor of them, people just don't want them inside their house. And I think it's because, people, even if they can't put a name on it, they know that they can track all these icky things throughout them. The feces and everything that they leave everywhere can make surfaces dirty and full of icky stuff. They can hide out and aggregate in large numbers. You see one, and there's usually more where that follows. You almost never just see one cockroach. There's usually many more hiding somewhere. So they like their warmth, their moisture, electronics, nooks and crannies. They don't need that much space to tuck themselves in and do all sorts of gross cockroach things. So in your inspections, you got to make sure you can look in all those little nooks and crannies to find their spots. And if you can offer some sort of cleaning service too, that helps treat some of the health problems that may be happening because of the cockroaches, not just getting rid of them, but also their molts, their feces, their allergens that are around. So not just treating the bug problem, but working to treat the customer's problem, which is also a public health thing. And so our monitoring typically, I mean, you're asking the customer what they've seen, but you can be putting out your sticky cards underneath different places that are harder to look underneath and that can catch things. Cockroaches are nocturnal. They are really not going to be running around a lot during the day unless you have a really bad infestation. But cooperation from the customers, the sanitation, removing those food sources, slightly different than with rodents in that cockroaches don't need nearly as much food and it can be a lot smaller and it could just be gunky bits here and there. But we work with the customer, and then the things that we can do, we can put out cockroach baits, we can vacuum up large numbers, that mechanical control, as well as the baits, that chemical control. So you can do your sprays as well if you have a larger population. But those are some of our facets of IPM that we use for cockroaches. And then flies. This is our next category, and I believe this might be our one of our last ones. Flies, similar disease and health concerns as we had with cockroaches. The flies uh, can certainly get to just about anything by flying around. Filth flies specifically is the one we're talking about here. They exist and breed around the filth, around gunky, icky, decaying organic material that is filled with other bacteria, and they can fly that gunky, icky bacteria from their breeding sites there to anywhere else in the house, and that can cause a lot of disease and health issues. So that gunky, icky stuff that I said, it can be everything from indoor things, outdoor things. We have small and large flies, different places where they'll be. It can be the gunky bottom of a drain from someone who doesn't do dishes that often. It can be animal feces outside that can attract a lot of flies. There's a lot of different places where they breed and they thrive, and then all of those things that are full of bacteria and nastiness then get dragged over with those flies as they fly around. Um, Here's some examples of forward flies specifically, but really a lot of different flies. This is some things they could be in restaurants, underneath the bottom of equipment, cracks in the tiles in a kitchen floor, garbage disposals, rotting food, cadavers. That's not a usual one we're going to be seeing on a regular basis, but a dead animal in a wall, that can be a source for flies, and that's got all sorts of icky stuff we don't want being tracked around. Um, other types of flies too, and we talked about some of that cultural control, and not just fruit flies, but in general, sealing those trash receptacles. That's going to be one of our big sources of cooperation with our customers is sanitation exclusion. How are we keeping these flies out of our house in the first place? And how are we keeping these flies from finding places to breed, from making sure that that icky organic decaying material is not there for the flies to keep enjoying themselves. So monitoring again can be things like sticky cards, light traps as well. Flies love a light trap, and that's a really great way to track how many are there. The things that you can do control wise, foaming cleaners, that would be a chemical and mechanical. Control is scrubbing it with those foaming cleaners, finding and eliminating those breeding sites. You as a professional are going to be able to track those down maybe a little better than someone who doesn't know as much about them. So that's what you're going to do in trying to tell your customer how to work with them on preventing pest issues from popping up, monitoring what's there, and treating the situation as a whole, not just the flies, but thinking too, okay, what other pests could these problems beget? And I mean, cockroaches and filth flies are kind of hand in hand, a lot of crossover with those. So by preventing one pest issue, you're working on another too. And rapid firing through, I think this is our last pest that I'm going to talk about today are bed bugs. This is something that I think people do have a healthy amount of fear towards them. Some people can get a little bit overly concerned, but honestly, they're one of the worst things to have around in terms of difficulty to get rid of, as well as some of the health issues. They can be very hard to find sometimes. They can tuck themselves away in tiny, tiny cracks and crevices, so they can be difficult to find in an initial inspection. If a customer saw one, it again, most pests, you don't just see one, there's more hiding somewhere. And these infestations, this is bed bugs are one of the main pests that will lead to some of those psychological and mental health effects that we talked about very early in this presentation when I mentioned things like when people think they're seeing these bugs and they're not there. Well, sometimes they're just a really hard to find bed bug. So you really do have to take people as seriously as possible and do everything you can to do a thorough inspection. But even once bed bugs are gone, people can have a traumatic, a PTSD type response to these pests. And from, months or weeks, years after, they can be thinking, oh my gosh, I feel like I can feel them crawling on me. So they're a huge, huge problem public health wise. But just generally, they are very hard to kill. They can survive in a lot of extreme situations and temperatures and all that. So that does make our job as pest management professionals pretty tough. Um, and so, why they're pests? Well, we talked about some of the mental things just a second ago. They do feed on blood, they bite people. Not everyone reacts to bedbug bites, so sometimes you could have a whole family where only one person is reacting to the bites, even if everyone is being bitten. Some people don't get these itchy red bumps, and some people get them very badly. But just they can suck up a whole lot of blood and they need that blood for every stage of their life cycle. So they are feeding on people or even animals at a very high rate. They are really getting through a lot of a lot of blood on everyone. So that's one of the other reasons why it's so bad to have them around. As far as we're aware, there's no diseases that they can directly vector, so we're not worried about getting sick from the bites, but being covered in itchy red bites is really equivalent to being sick with something anyways, because that's just no fun regardless. Inspections with bed bugs, you're looking for live bugs, but as with IPM in general, you're not always looking for the live bugs. You're looking for the evidence of the bugs. You're looking for the things that show you that they've been there. Those with cockroaches, the fecal pellets; with rodents, the rodent droppings; with bed bugs, their fecal staining. The things that tell you bugs have been here, even when you don't see them right there, it tells you that they might still be around and you just haven't found the live ones yet. Um, but inspection tips for bed bugs is looking in every cozy corner, but no one is perfect. It can be really, really hard to find a singular bed bug lurking somewhere. But when you have a lot of them, you can usually find them. You can also set up all sorts of monitoring traps. We talked about sticky traps and some of the other pests we just rolled through, but we have those pitfall traps, the things you can put underneath of a table leg. And then cooperation for people with bed bugs is critical. Treatment preparations, vigilance against new infestations once we've eliminated an infestation. It's a lot of work, and if you don't fully explain why to a customer that they have to work with you, then it's not going to be as effective. And we have all sorts of heat treatments and fumigations and even some biologics that we can use to treat the bed bugs, our mechanical or our chemical control measures that we have that we can use against them. So that's kind of all of the different pest groups that I kind of rapid fired us through. So you have a little bit of a blurb on each of those, but to kind of think of what IPM tactics do and how we're using them. Like those are just examples of some of the things you do. But we know that every good IPM program, like when you're getting involved, your first inspection is super critical. You make sure that you've got all the right tools at your disposal. Your flashlight, your mirror, your phone camera to take pictures of what you see, your documentation, making notes. Something like a dog is not always necessary. There are folks who use it, but not a needed thing. Um, but basically, you want to make sure you are prepared to do a thorough inspection to prepare everything and have your knowledge of what is happening so that you can treat the pest as a whole, so that you can get that customer on board to cooperate with you and make sure that we prevent pest issues in the future. There's no such thing as spray and forget about it. It is always important to understand the entire picture of what we have going on and communicating that with the people who are involved in the situations that we treat. So that is where I end there. And we can contact me with any questions you might have. You can email me directly if you want to chat further about any particular issue. That is my contact information. So thank you for joining me today.